I am Games.
What a coincidence. Word on the street is I'm also Games.
And we're Games. This is a podcast about games. We haven't done one of these in a couple days because Tom here was out sick with the flu.
Yeah.
But now we're back, and we're going to do sort of a PSA this episode. We're doing something a little different. Instead of talking about an individual game or something, we're going to talk about basically just this premise. And I mean, if you already get this, you don't even have to listen. But follow people, not studios.
Yeah, I think that's something that's really important but difficult to do, especially in the way that games are reported and just media is reported in general.
Yeah.
It's so easy to latch on to like, oh, Nintendo, or oh, Insomniac, or these people that are responsible for something that was on a splash screen of a game from 10 years ago that I remember fondly as a kid. Surely the magic will still be there when companies are just individuals.
I mean, it's funny because I think you go down a sort of rabbit hole as you get older, because when you're a kid, you just pay attention to franchises. You just see, because that's the most obvious iconic branding. It's like,
that's why they exist.
It's another Zelda, But then when you start to realize, like when you play multiple games that aren't from the same franchise, but they are from the same studio, and you like multiples, you tend to start thinking, oh, I like the games made by this studio. Well, they know that you're going to notice those things. So they're going to start saying things like, from the people who brought you X, from the people who made this. And it's particularly bad in movies because they'll just name like anyone on the project who had something to do with some other movie that was popular, Like maybe the producer of one film will be like the guy whose name is on the poster of something he had no creative involvement with and literally just like put some money forward towards,
Yeah.
But like with games, I feel like it's even more insidious because so much emphasis is placed on the studio and not on the individuals. And because games are such a collaborative medium, and because studios will usually try to have some kind of consistent identity, you end up in a situation where, say, a new Bioware game comes out, and it's an action RPG. Bioware has made so many action RPGs that you love. Don't you trust Bioware as a company? But then, what you realize is that anyone can make an action RPG. Who individually made the games that you actually like?
Sure.
That is what you need to be asking yourself.
Because, like, Bioware can be anybody,
Yeah.
In 10 years, Bioware can be totally different people.
Exactly.
So, just because the name's on there, that doesn't mean you're going to get the same sort of shit.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing that right now with the critical reception so far of Anthem.
I would say all the recent, because I mean, this all sort of started bubbling up when Mass Effect 3 came out. And that game was hugely controversial, especially for its ending. And at that point, a significant amount of the team who made Mass Effect had already been leaving.
Yeah.
So, like, already with Mass Effect 3, so much of it was different personnel that, like, of course the games has these issues because it's not the same creative vision behind it.
I mean, I think it was Casey Hudson who was in charge of like most of Mass Effect 3, and he was not like the head of Mass Effect 1 and 2. He kind of was given the job after the restructuring and shit. And then a lot of people were giving, a lot of people had hopes that Andromeda was just going to be a fluke because it was done by Bioware Montreal and not Bioware Edmonton, which is like the main Bioware studio. And people were like, well, this wasn't real Bioware. They've been working on Anthem for 6 years. And clearly now we can see that even the Bioware that everyone says this is our Bioware, # our guys, they're still under-delivering.
I mean, and the thing is that it's so complex that even to look at just like a head developer is not enough. Like, people give too much credit to like directors and head guys because in the world of film there's this worship of the auteur director and this idea that like it all falls on the director's shoulders. But even among auteur film directors, like for instance, if you are a huge fan of Quentin Tarantino, like a big part of what you might see in his movies is like that they look great. They have great cinematography. Well, he hires really great cinematographers to work on his films. If he didn't have them, they would not be as good looking.
Sure.
And so you have to consider everyone involved in what they are bringing to the table. For me, like, there was this moment, and I know I've brought this up in other podcasts and videos before, but Rick and Morty, when season 2 first started, there was this party that like a premiere party that all the people who worked on the show were at. And just for the hell of it, Justin Roiland was streaming this event through, like, I don't know, Periscope or something. It was just, like, a weird random stream that he had posted about on Twitter. And it's just, everybody who worked on the show is drunk and having a good time. And they kept bringing people over to this couch and just, like, sort of interviewing them briefly or just talking about them. And several times they would bring over people and they'd be like, yeah, this guy is, like, one of the most important people working on this show. But he has been scouted by Disney because of his work on this show. Disney can offer him way better pay, and he has a family. So he's not going to be here for season 3. So if season 3 sucks, it's because we lost this guy. And when I heard that, it was, like, mind-blowing, because nobody's going to think of it that way when Justin Roiland and Dan Harmon are still on the show.
Sure.
They're going to think, oh, it's the same people, it's the same show, but, like, it's already not the same show. They've already changed a bunch of people along the way, and this happens to anything that runs for long enough. No studio is always going to be the same people unless they are incredibly tightly knit. And it's not that that never happens, but, like, for the most part, people come and go. They change jobs, they, seek other opportunities, and, especially in a world like games, where developers are getting bought and traded among publishers and shit, where BioWare gets bought by EA, and obviously EA is going to make a lot of changes to the company. And a lot of people are going to point at it and say, oh, EA bought BioWare, and so poor innocent BioWare would have made all the right decisions, but EA corporate is shutting all those decisions down. Well, the reality is that probably a lot of those people who were there because they wanted to make the kind of games that they want to make just left.
Sure.
And, like, so even if EA was not holding them under such a tight grip, they just don't have the talent. And this did happen. A lot of people left BioWare. And, like, you need to follow that. You need to follow, like, if you want to find games that you're going to like, you need to follow the talent. And there are a lot of people who even are taking advantage of this because they can go to Kickstarter and say, I was the talent.
Sure.
But then you end up with, like, Keiji Inafune, who is like, oh, everybody calls him the father of Mega Man. Well, then you do research, and if you haven't seen the Stop Skeletons from Fighting videos about Inafune and Mega Man history, like, he was not even a designer on the games. Like, he was just, he was sort of like a project lead, but, like, he wasn't making the creative decisions behind all these Mega Man games, and he wasn't the guy who created them initially. He sort of became in charge of the projects after a certain point. And so, like, you look at him, and his history is in business. He is a businessman. He is not a, so again, you need to really look into who did what and why. And sometimes that stuff's not readily available because, especially in the old days, companies used to hide that shit deliberately as a marketing tactic. Where if you look at, like, 80s Japanese games where they wouldn't even let programmers put their real names on the games because they were so afraid of them getting sniped, It's difficult, but just don't let yourself get hyped by a studio or by that kind of marketing ploy is, I guess, our main message here. Do you have any examples you want to talk about?
I mean, another thing that's relevant is Metroid Prime 4.
Right.
Because that was just, the development of Metroid Prime 4 was just canceled, and people got hyped because, like, oh, they're bringing Retro Studios back to work on Prime 4. It's like, but most of the people who were with Retro back during the development of the Prime trilogy aren't at Retro anymore.
For clarity, it wasn't completely canceled, right? They just restarted development?
Yeah, they restarted the development. Yeah. So they canceled what they had, essentially.
Yeah.
They stopped. That whole version of the game has been scrapped. So it's just like, shit. You know, everyone is like super excited because they see that name that was attached to the franchise, but like the people in the studio doing the work aren't the same people, so you're gonna get a different sort of tone. You know, I mean, a classic example of franchises not being something to trust is 343's handling of Halo after Halo Reach.
Yeah.
You know, Halo 4 and Halo 5 have both been disasters to different degrees because they're just different kinds of games.
I don't know about disasters. There's a lot of people who will defend the newer Halo games.
Well, there's a lot of dumb people out there.
But there's not a lot of people who will defend like Mass Effect Andromeda or something,
Sure.
you know. Yeah, it gets really muddy, especially when you start having like people who do paint themselves as the auteurs, and then like when the new game is different, everyone's gonna be like, well, did he just like lose his magic? And it's like, well, I don't know who was working under him, and like in some cases, even trusting, like even on the individual level, you can't guarantee that those people are always going to deliver, because yeah, some of them will get in over their heads and work on something they shouldn't have.
I mean, there's also just, you know, there's just like the time and the place. So it's like, you know, you're lightning in a bottle, you can't capture it again. You know, the bigger these projects get in scope, the harder it is to kind of really keep track of who's doing what and who's responsible for what. You know, when you have like a small independent studio that's like 2 guys, you know, like Super Meat Boy or whatever, it's like, you know, that DNA is pretty intrinsically like one for one represented in what they make. But when you have a big, you know, Bioware sized studio, where did all the pieces come together? You know, what was the blend that made KOTOR versus Andromeda? It's hard to say where all the stuff adds up.
Even with those individuals, like there's a lot of mind state and like what they're trying to do that goes into it, because it's not always about trying to create the same type of thing at the same level of quality. And I know, for, you know, being me personally as a creator, I make all kinds of different shit. And like sometimes people come to me and they're like, well, why are you doing this type of thing instead of this type of thing that you've done before? And it's like, well, the intentions are different. Like I, as an individual, have a lot of different needs and evolving interests. And I might not want to make the same type of content. Or it might be that something that you may have enjoyed this, but it didn't do anything for me, either emotionally or monetarily, you know? So like, I'm not going to return to that well. And so, you know, even returning to a creator over and over, I'm a big proponent of you know I'm anti-hype. And this is all why I'm anti-hype, because I don't see a reason to trust anything to be good until it's been proven to be good. And like, I don't buy games on release day. I buy games when they've got a lot of good reviews and people are telling me it's a good game, and I can look at it and see it and, you know, touch it and feel it and understand it, because just knowing that this guy's name is on there, it can be a little exciting, because you're like, you know, we got kind of hype about, not Shinji Mikami, but,
Hideki Kamiya.
Hideki Kamiya being on Chain, what is it called?
Astral Chain. And it's like, because Hideki Kamiya has a history of reinventing the action game and like doing really interesting shit, but does that mean that we guaranteed are gonna like that game? No. Like, you know, I barely touched the Wonderful 101, and like I appreciate it as a game. I think it's super interesting, but like, you know, it wasn't a guarantee that it would be my type of thing just because that guy worked on it, because he was obviously trying to do something different. He was not making Bayonetta 5, you know, Devil May Cry 9. Yeah, I mean, another great example is just bands. You know, they change as they, you know, grow, and everybody's taste is going to change. Just time is going to change everything, regardless of if it's the exact same talent. So I don't know. I think especially in video games, when they're doing these yearly releases of like these popular franchises, you know, it's impossible to like even expect the same people to be involved back to back on like the last 2 Call of Duties, when they're swapping through 3 different studios just to keep them coming out year on year.
One that cracks me up in particular is like that, like with the Zelda series, that like everybody just kind of imagines that Shigeru Miyamoto is just the Zelda guy. And it's like, he has directed almost none of them. Like, there's been several Zelda directors who have done multiple titles in the series, and like, you know, they have way more influence than he does over how each game comes out. Like,
I mean, he's like the auteur of Nintendo, you know? Like,
yeah.
everybody just throws everything at his feet when it's not really fair.
He's barely, like, I don't think he's nearly as involved in anything as people think he is. I think he's basically just an ideas guy who's just, like, constantly trying to think of a new idea. But, like...
To his detriment at times.
Yeah.
Just go look at Star Fox Zero for that.
Or
the fact there's no fucking new F-Zero. He's like, I don't know what to do with it. It's like...
Or just things like, there was that one E3 where it was like, he was showing off this, like, robot punching game and, like, some weird tower defense kind of game, and it was like, the stuff that Miyamoto was actually involved with was the least interesting shit that was at E3. It was all very new, but it was shit that nobody related to or cared about, because, like, you know, any franchise that his name is tangentially related to, like, when he talks about, we don't have an idea for F-Zero, I don't think that's really him. I think first of all, I think he's just avoiding trying to say that F-Zero doesn't sell.
Sure.
And that's why they don't want to make another one. Because they're like, why would we bother when we could work on something more profitable, like another Zelda HD remake? You know, like it's what's the word I'm looking? It's like a cute way of saying we don't think you'll buy F-Zero. Because if you say something like that, then all the fans are just going to come out and say, we'll buy it. But then the game's going to come out and it's not going to sell that much, right? Because it's not a major franchise. So, like, they know better, but they can't say it. So, like, you know, and then everybody throws it at the feet of Miyamoto, and it's like, he's just a figurehead. Like, he's not like the lead developer at Nintendo or anything, you know? And Nintendo's good at picking figureheads. Like, they have, like, their little stable of guys who are like the faces of everything. But yeah, the staff completely changes. And I'm trying to, like, there's a lot of cases where people who did work on, like, great games have gone on to form other studios and do the same type of shit. And, like, while I was making fun of Kickstarter earlier, there has been a bunch of Kickstarter games where it's like, you know, like the Wasteland games or Pillars of Eternity and stuff like that for WRPGs, where it's like some of the developers who made those classic Western RPGs that the fan base is still, like, hype about are making these new games. And then you get those fans of, like, Fallout 1 and 2 crying about how, like, oh, Fallout, they ruined Fallout by making it different all the time. And it's like, well, fuck the name brand that's on it. Those people who actually made those games have made other shit that is the same thing. It just doesn't have that brand on it.
Right.
Who cares if Fallout's not the same thing? Follow the people who made the classic, not the studio, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tough. I think it's, you know, the reason that IPs have so much value and companies defend them is because you have that illogical emotional attachment to it. It's like, yeah. I know that there's a game that's functionally Fallout right there, but I want Fallout. I want that. That's what I want.
There's also, there's brand loyalties tied up in it, and also a lot of emotions, and also money. Because, like, I think about Hironobu Sakaguchi, who was, like, a director on a lot of the early Final Fantasies, and, like, even he wasn't, like, the lead guy on, like, the biggest, baddest Final Fantasy games. But when he left Square Enix, there has not been a great Final Fantasy game since, but there have been great Final Fantasy in all but name games since.
Sure.
Because, like, if you look at the era of Final Fantasy that I would say stretches really from 4 on, I guess all of them are kind of similar up through 10. And, like, if you looked at 7, 8, 9, and 10, they all have very similar values in the way that the games are structured, and, like, the type of storytelling, the type of world building, the type of mechanics, and the pacing especially is very similar throughout those games. So then you have this moment where Sakaguchi fucks up by making Final Fantasy Spirits Within and getting way too into his weird virtual idol thing, I guess. He was 10 or 15 years too early for the virtual idol craze.
Yeah.
Basically. But so he takes the fall, he leaves Square Enix. Well, Final Fantasy goes on, and it's in the hands of different people than it was before. So why is it a surprise that we get all these games that don't relate to what was good about it before? Meanwhile, he goes on and makes Lost Odyssey on the Xbox 360, and I start playing that game and I'm like, this is literally like the next Final Fantasy after 10. Like the thought process behind how the battles work, how bosses work, how the world is structured, the pacing of the game, the type of storytelling, the type of world building, it's all thoroughly Final Fantasy. The title, Lost Odyssey, sounds like it's a basically Final Fantasy, you know? So it's clearly the next in that lineage, but Final Fantasy has been a Sony property for a while, and Final Fantasy is still coming out. So if you're somebody who's like, I bought a PlayStation for Final Fantasy, then you don't want to buy an Xbox 360 for Lost Odyssey. But you are not playing Final Fantasy spiritually, whereas on the 360 exists Final Fantasy spiritually. So it's like, if any, and it's funny because, you know, it was heavily advertised that, like, Hironobu Sakaguchi, the father of Final Fantasy, left the studio. He made this new studio, Mistwalker. Every time one of those games came out, it was highly advertised as, like, this is from the guy who created Final Fantasy. And granted, those games were successful. It's not like nobody played, like, Blue Dragon or Lost Odyssey or whatever. But, like, nonetheless, it's really weird to me that people are still so attached to Final Fantasy and complaining about it and its trajectory, and it's like, who cares? Who cares about Final Fantasy if it's not the same people? It's just a name brand. Fuck the name brand.
Yeah, you're being conned.
Yeah.
We're all fucking being conned, you know? And we fall for it just because we're dumb.
How many people who worked at Square died in the time it took to make fucking Kingdom Hearts 3? Probably at least a few, right?
Yeah.
Oh boy. Well, I don't know if there's much to add to this point other than more stories of the same. But
yeah, I think the point's pretty clear. Just kind of like do your homework, you know, and like don't get too invested in the name. There's so much more beyond that.
I mean, I think part of the reason that it doesn't is that not everybody takes this shit that seriously. Like,
sure.
I think from a lot of people's perspective, it's like, game comes out, they see the name, they get hype, they watch the ads, game releases, everybody either bitches it, like, people like to have the opportunity to bitch about something, and it, especially if you're like a YouTuber or somebody who's making videos about something, you live for the name brand fucking up, because then you get to make videos about it and automatically get ad revenue for something that, you know, basically you are also championing from the bad business practices, you know, like you are also benefiting from these companies' lies and their misdirection and the fact that nobody's researching. But like, if you care about how you spend your money and want to have a good time and not be disappointed and not be let down, it's like, it's hard for me to have a lot of sympathy for people who complain about their favorite franchise going downhill when they're not doing any research on it. It's like, yeah, no shit, it went downhill. If the same people aren't working on it, it goes downhill. Unless they're better, you know, which has happened.
Sure. I mean, there's definitely
Nier Automata is probably the best in its franchise because Platinum developed it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like went back to what you said about having to keep an open mind and like being receptive to what the product actually is and not what you want it to be or what you expect it to be or what you hope for it to be. Because there's always surprises. People can always add some new life to a franchise. You know, maybe Final Fantasy 16 will be good.
It could happen.
I mean,
I really want to believe that Square would, like, after these games have finally come out and they've seen the reception, that they would change something about how they do things, but, like, at the same time, there's no evidence to suggest that. So.
It seems like quadrupling down is the strategy of the day, but you never know. I don't know. Fucking video games. Just play good games.
Be the games you want to see.
Yeah.
By the way, some people, I've seen some people in the comments suggest the possibility of us opening a Patreon. First of all, what do you think?
I mean, we were talking about that like a few months ago, and it never really went anywhere.
I mean, I had said we should do it once the channel hits 10K, and then it did. And
I guess we did do that, yeah.
But I want to know what you guys think in the like what. I already know that there's going to be people who say, like, I would donate to a Patreon, but only if you were doing edited content all the time. And it's like, that might be a goal that we set up in the Patreon, but I mean, it's not going to be like $50 and we can make an edited video every week or anything like that. We will set goals, I guess, but
definitely
let us know what you think. Do you care enough about I Am Games and its particular, because it would go to both of us. It would be a split thing, and we both have our own Patreons anyways, but if you particularly want us to talk about and analyze video games, and we also stream on Twitch, which, you know, currently the main way that this show is supported is by Twitch subscriptions, but we don't make a ton of money off of that, so just let us know what you think. If you would support a Patreon from us, if enough people say they would, then we'll probably do it. But, be the games you want to see. I Am Games.
I Am Also Games.
Signing out.